Tonight, the vice presidential candidates take center stage.
Republican J.D. Vance facing off with Democrat Tim Walz for the first time.
And it might be the last debate before voters head to the polls.
Our special coverage starts right now.
A critical showdown just 5 weeks from Election Day.
Ohio Senator J.D. Vance and Minnesota Governor Tim Walz taking on each other for the first time.
Let's get to work in Washington, D.C. When we fight, we win.
The candidates have been crisscrossing the country in the final sprint as polls show an extremely tight race.
But can they make the case for their running mates and prove to Americans that they're ready to be a heartbeat away from the presidency?
From NBC News, here are Lester Holt and Savannah Guthrie.
Good evening and welcome to our special coverage of the first and only vice presidential debate before the general election, which is now just 35 days away.
And we're just moments away now from that historic debate. Ohio Republican Senator J.D. Vance and Minnesota Democratic Governor Tim Walz facing off in front of the American people.
Tonight's showdown will be held in New York City, and as mentioned, it's potentially the last debate we will see before Election Day.
It's also perhaps the best chance for Vance and Walz to introduce themselves to the country and to try to shake up this tight race between their running mates Donald Trump and Kamala Harris.
The debate also comes as the U.S. grapples with crises at home and abroad, including the search for the missing after more than 150 people were killed by Hurricane Helene's impact. Middle East after Iran launched nearly 200 ballistic missiles at Israel earlier today.
It is a busy news evening. We want to start with NBC News international correspondent Raf Sanchez with the latest. He's in Israel's northern border with Lebanon at this hour. Raf, good evening to you.
Savannah, Lester, good evening. We came here looking for signs of Israel's ground offensive against Hezbollah in southern Lebanon, which is just the other side of that mountain ridge. Instead, we found ourselves staring up at a night sky filled with Iranian ballistic missiles. The Israeli military says 180 missiles were fired in total. They sent millions of people running to bomb shelters. These missiles coming in 2 waves and taking just 11 minutes to fly from Iran to Israeli airspace. Israeli forces scrambling to intercept them with a big assist from U.S. naval destroyers positioned in the Middle East. The Pentagon says they played a role in protecting the skies over Israel tonight. Almost miraculously, even though some of those missiles did break through Israeli air defenses, Israel's government is saying there are no reports of any fatalities or serious injuries among its citizens. One Palestinian man was killed in the occupied West Bank, but that sense of relief undermined by a mass shooting in Tel Aviv. Israeli police saying 2 terrorists opening fire on the light rail there, killing at least 6 people. Palestinian Islamic Jihad claiming responsibility for that attack. Now, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in a late-night address to his country saying the Iranian missile attack is over and vowing to retaliate against Iran for this second set of missile strikes in just 5 months. The decision that he and other senior Israeli leaders make in the coming hours may decide whether or not this region hurtles further towards all-out war. Savannah, Lester.
All right, Raf, thank you very much.
And here at home, there's that urgent search underway to find the missing after more than 150 people were killed by Hurricane Helene's impact. NBC's Sam Brock is on the ground in hard-hit North Carolina, just outside Asheville.
Yeah, Lester, Savannah, good evening. That is a number, 151 fatalities, Lester, that just continues to climb. I'm standing in one of these remote towns that we really have not had much of a perspective on until now, guys, because the interstates were closed, but I-20 just opened up. I'm in Swannanoa. Looking around right now, I spoke with a man who described this in terms of the impacts as sort of a combination between what it looks like after a hurricane, a flood event, and an earthquake. Over my shoulder, and I know it's dark, that is a car that has been tilted up vertically from Russia rushing water. The water line on the back of this house is about 7 or 8 feet. There are buckled roads behind me just down the street here that look like an earthquake ruptured the cement. So, Lester, Savannah, you can understand why now we're looking at a death toll that has risen in this county from 40 to 57. Again, 151 and counting throughout the region. In terms of what I have seen personally on the ground, supplies were flowing again today, but the water crisis, guys, is real. I had a conversation with parents who said that they were just hoping to get water to make oatmeal for their child. I spoke with a woman whose father is on dialysis. She was in her car charging the oxygen machine while also waiting to try and go and get groceries. There are so many folks out there right now that just cannot access information because they can't get online or they can't access social media. That has been a true problem as well. FEMA, the agency, came out today and said they have somewhere in the neighborhood of 3,500 personnel across the region. So that's 6 different states, 1,200 search and urban rescue folks, 2 million liters of water disseminated, 1.9 million meals. But the reality in Western North Carolina here tonight is people want to know, where was this on Monday? It took 48 hours at least to get water moving, some of these meals moving, and why can't you reach some of these super mountainous regions? We know how difficult the topography is. Lastly, President Biden is going to be out here by air tomorrow to tour the damage, to tour this zone. He certainly doesn't want to take away resources, he says, but is committed to helping restore these communities as long as it takes. Lester and Savannah, back to you.
Truly desperate times. Sam Brock, thanks for bringing us that.
A snapshot of just some of the issues at home and abroad that will animate tonight's debate between the vice presidential nominees, and that is what we're here to cover. It's going to start in less than an hour now. We want to turn to meet the press moderator, Kristen Welker, and our senior Washington correspondent, Hallie Jackson. So let's talk about it. And Kristen, why don't you start, kind of set the scene for us, where we are in this political race, 35 days away, I think Lester said. It's getting close. It's very tight.
It's very tight, and this debate is going to be a significant data point. Why? Because there is, at this point in time, no second debate scheduled between former President Trump and Vice President Kamala Harris. So I think this vice presidential debate takes on new meaning, and it does come against the backdrop of all of these issues, the intensifying issues in Iran and tensions in Iran, as well as, of course, what Sam was just reporting on, the devastation in the wake of Helene, not to mention, of course, the dock strike. So this is a real commander-in-chief test. Right now, Vice President Kamala Harris gets higher marks when it comes to who's the stronger commander-in-chief. But again, she's 1 point ahead of former President Trump. So here, their attack dogs are going to be front and center trying to make the case. Think about tonight as the beginning of the closing arguments in this campaign.
And Hallie, to play on that point, no further debates. That means these number twos essentially get not the final word, but they get a big piece of the final word.
Well, maybe the final word with an audience this big, Lester and Savannah, because think about it. Even last cycle's single vice presidential debate had more eyeballs on it than either of the conventions this year. So this is a huge platform. It is a huge stage. And there's a lot riding on it for both of these candidates, considering that if you look at the debate stage, one of the candidates there, Tim Walz, has the highest favorability rating of anybody on the tickets. J.D. Vance, the senator from Ohio, has the lowest. So in some ways, while they've been on the ticket for months, this is their introduction to America in a really big way. I'm going to be looking to see how Governor Walz parries what are expected to be some attacks on his progressive record as governor of Minnesota. The Trump campaign has previewed that that is likely a line that they will push, along with how he handles some of the imprecise language that he used around, for example, his military service and record. For Senator Vance, going to be looking for how he responds to the questions that have been raised about his previous comments about former President Trump, about Project 2025, for example, and about a new line of attack that you're seeing the Harris campaign really hit harder, which is former President Trump's age and fitness for office. Sound familiar? This was an issue, of course, that President Biden faced when he was on the ticket. The Harris team is trying to make this a thing, if you will, for Donald Trump.
All right, our senior national correspondent Tom Yamas is in the spin room near where the debate will take place. Tom, what can we expect?
All right, good evening, Lester. We are in the spin room tonight where there may be big surprises. You may remember Team Biden took some time to get to the spin room after their first debate in Atlanta, which ultimately ended the president's campaign. And then after a tough debate for former President Trump, he actually entered the spin room in Philadelphia. Here's what we do know about tonight's debate. It's being held in New York City, not exactly a battleground, but we expect this debate to be fiery nonetheless. There will be lights in front of each candidate to indicate how much time they have left to speak. The candidates will also each have a countdown countdown clock. The debate will be 90 minutes with 2 breaks. There will be no opening statements. Each candidate will be given 2 minutes to answer questions with 2-minute responses from the other candidate. If needed, 1-minute rebuttals. Moderators can give additional time if they feel it is warranted. Governor Walz will give the first closing statement, followed by Senator Vance, who won a coin toss and chose to go last. There will be no audience in the hall, but here is a key change tonight. The mics will be unmuted. Remember, they've been muted for the last 2 debates, which Democrats thought gave former President Trump an advantage. But mics can still be muted if things get out of control. The moderators will do that. Candidates will not be allowed to interact with staff during those 2 breaks, and candidates are not allowed to have props or pre-written notes. They will be given a pen, a pad of paper, and a water bottle. So the big question tonight, will there be fact checks? The answer is sort of. CBS says the moderators are focused on encouraging exchanges between the candidates rather than fact-checking. They will have something up on their site. But, of course, we do that every debate. We're going to have something on our site as well, fact-checking in real time on NBCnews.com. Guys, back to you.
All right, that sets us up nicely for Garrett Haake, who covers the Trump campaign. He joins us also from the spin room, a very tight spin room, so everybody's right next to each other in there, Garrett. What are you expecting? What is the Trump campaign signaling tonight?
Well, Savannah, I covered J.D. Vance on Capitol Hill. I've covered him on the campaign trail, and I can tell you he is very comfortable mixing it up with reporters. He's comfortable with the back and forth and taking questions. He doesn't have a lot of traditional debate experience, but he's good with the kind of give and take and the kind of parrying that you might see in a debate with this format with the mics open. I also expect him to come out aggressive. I interviewed Donald Trump earlier today, but when I asked him what he wanted to see from Vance, how he would describe victory, he told me he expected to see Vance try to expose Tim Walz and Kamala Harris on the issue of the border specifically. That has been the animating issue for Donald Trump going all the way back to 2015. It's something he wants to see from his running mate here tonight. Vance, on the campaign trail, has been very comfortable in that traditional attack dog role. I don't expect to see much different tonight. You know, Hallie mentioned those favorability numbers with Vance being underwater. The Trump senior advisor said to me some number of weeks ago now that when this race is over, they expect all of these candidates to be unpopular. I think you're not going to see J.D. Vance necessarily try to reinvent himself on this stage. I think you're going to see him go pretty aggressively at Tim Walz and primarily at Kamala Harris throughout the course of the night.
All right, Garrett, thank you.
And for more on what to expect, let's bring in Jason Miller. He's a senior advisor to the Trump-Vance campaign. Great to have you here. Talk about the mission that J.D. Vance has tonight. Is it a rather narrow mission?
Well, J.D. Vance is going to remind people that we had a great economy under President Trump, and that's something that President Trump can bring back literally on day one. He can start getting that back in order. And the other thing President Trump can do on day one is secure our southern border, something that's been completely out of control. But we're going to see really a contrast of ideas, but I think the high bar is set for Tim Walz. I'm going to tell you why. Not only does he have to defend his own record, which is a bit bumpy, he has to defend Kamala Harris's record as DA, AG, Senator, Vice President. There's a lot there. But also Tim Walz has to defend Joe Biden's record. Joe Biden is the one who's been leading the Democrat ticket over the past 3.5 years. Now, we know a lot of the items have been on Kamala Harris's plate, such as being the border czar, being the deciding vote for 2 of these massive spending bills. But this is really a direction. Do you want to get our economy, get our border back on track? You want to keep going in the dangerous direction that we're going right now? J.D. Vance is going to remind people that there is hope, and that's President Trump.
Do you think that J.D. Vance has any work to do, Jason, with this issue of likability? I mean, we mentioned in our poll since 1988, he's the second least popular, the highest negative ratings of any vice presidential candidate. With suburban women in particular, he's got a net negative 21 with suburban women. Do you think he needs to take on some of this baggage, you know, the childless cat lady and all that kind of thing? Is that part of what you hope he addresses tonight?
As J.D. Vance talks about his upbringing, the humble upbringing he had, everybody knows from Hillbilly Elegy that his grandmother largely raised him. His own mother struggled with addiction. He's someone who went and served in the Marines, was served overseas as well. He has a great story, and he is able to get out there and talk with voters and tell that story, then I think they're going to move his direction. Keep in mind, not everybody watched the political conventions. Not everybody saw Tim Walz of the Democrats or J.D. Vance of the Republican. So for many
voters. This will be the first time that they're really hearing from these candidates. J.D. Vance also, he's probably the best communicator at pushing President Trump's message outside of President Trump. He's doing 2-3 Sunday shows every week. I think this is also something where it could catch up with Tim Walz. They've been playing the Washington Post had a headline this afternoon saying it was the Bubble Boy campaign. Well, now he's in the bright lights, and we'll see how Tim Walz does.
In that same vein, we've seen former President Trump get very personal in this final stretch of the campaign, calling Kamala Harris a mentally ill. Do you think that J.D. Vance will channel some of that negative personal material tonight?
I think J.D. Vance is going to really talk about the issues that are impacting the country, and I think he's going to call out some of the inaccuracies that we've seen from Tim Walz, from Kamala Harris, haven't exactly been truthful on the campaign trail. And I'll tell you, Lester, as I was watching one of Tim Walz's debates earlier today, he had this great line in one of his previous debates where he said, "I'm not going to raise your taxes. I'm just going to roll back the tax cuts." Tim Walz can lie through his teeth, but when J.D. Vance starts talking about the economy, how he's going to help everyday people, it's really something that's magical. I think J.D. Vance will do well tonight. I think he'll represent President Trump well. And again, Americans who are struggling to get by or wondering why we have this chaos, there's going to be hope. J.D. Vance can restore that hope.
Jason Miller, thank you.
No, before we let him go, we have to ask him, do you think that President Trump will debate again, Jason? He said no, but people can change their minds.
Well, as of right now, I would say no. As of this moment, this will be the final debate that we see. President Trump's done very well so far in the debates, and I think tonight J.D. Vance will do very well also. Although, again, Tim Walz, he's tough. He's been doing this for 2 decades. He's been in office for 20 years. J.D.'s only been in office for 2 years. So Tim's a professional at this, but J.D. Vance is going to do well.
Okay. Well, just so you know, your boss, Donald Trump, called Walz a total moron last night. So he apparently doesn't think as highly as you do of Tim Walz, but we'll continue to cover it. Yeah. Everyone is doing their expectation setting.
But when we talk about the issues, when President Trump is making those types of criticisms, he's pointing out the fact that we've allowed 20+ million illegals into this country. And, the language might be tough. Some people might push back and say that's not their cup of tea. But how does Tim Walz stand on that stage tonight and explain why Kamala Harris allowed 20 million illegals into this country? How does Tim Walz stand on that stage and explain why Kamala Harris had these 2 deciding votes that ultimately led to this record or near record inflation? We have to call out these tough issues. Too many people are struggling. This isn't time for powder puff football. We're going to get right down to it.
Yeah. By the way, the former president was talking about his debating skills. Said when he's going up against a moron, a total moron. So that was the issue. Anyway, Jason Miller, thank you so much. We'll see you later. Appreciate it. All right, let's bring in our chief White House correspondent, Peter Alexander, who's covering the Harris campaign. So, Peter, what are they signaling about tonight?
Well, it's a good question. As we've been speaking to those people close to Tim Walz, among the things I've heard is his priorities this evening, top among them all, will be to help amplify the case on behalf of Kamala Harris. This is as much about Kamala Harris in the eyes of Tim Walz as it will be about Donald Trump and J.D. Vance, according to those people who are close to his campaign. Notably, this is the first time that these two will ever be in person, J.D. Vance and Tim Walz. It does have the potential for some fireworks. They've been sniping, as we've witnessed for months, but mostly from a distance. Now, for the first time, they get to do it in that traditional running mate role as the attack dog. And one key voter group that I'm told both campaigns have been targeting is men, with Vance and Walz at the forefront of that fight. Walz, of course, the former high school football coach. He's a hunter, a plain-spoken Midwestern dad. Vance, who would be the youngest VP to serve in decades, he's really tried to frame his messaging toward younger guys. It's a place to watch. And as you watch tonight, recognize most Americans who haven't made their mind up yet, and that is a limited sliver of the American electorate right now. Even if they're not watching tonight, the campaigns recognize that it's the soundbite, the simple sound bites that may break through, how this is cut up and pieced together, and how it gets out to those limited number of undecided voters. To the Harris campaign, a lot of them are younger, particularly younger men, a racially diverse group. It's why they've been advertising on college football games and why they're looking at sports betting sites, among others, to sort of target their messaging in the couple days and weeks ahead.
All right, Peter, thank you. We're going to talk to Senator Mark Kelly in just a moment, but let me turn to the table here. Let's lift the veil off the expectation setting that goes on with the campaigns, because it just makes me laugh. You know, we just had Jason Miller, who's like, oh, Tim Walz is such a great debater. And then all of these Democrats are out in the press saying, Tim Walz is scared. He's not sure. J.D. Vance is this amazing debater. So it's like this reverse complimenting thing, so that when whatever happens, they can be like, well, we set those expectations and exceeded them.
By the way, a time-honored tradition for debate prep in decades past, right? I mean, this is what we always see. I actually spoke with the person who played Governor Walz in the prep for Senator J.D. Vance, Congressman Tom Emmer, and he did much of the same thing. This is strategic on the part of the campaigns. Why? Partly to, like, let the audience know that this is kind of what they can expect. Here's the reality. This is not their first rodeo. It is on a stage like this, but both of these candidates have done debates in the past. They've done debates for their races for Congress, for governor, for senator.
They've practiced. They're smart. They're capable. They're pros.
Exactly.
They're pros. And look, if you talk to allies of both of these campaigns, they say, here's the challenge for each of them. For Governor Walz, one ally said a good night for him is if he can keep all of those comments that J.D. Vance once made about Donald Trump, all of the criticism of him, in the spotlight. That's what allies want to see from him. In terms of J.D. Vance, and you were just talking to Jason Miller about this, Savannah and Lester, the comments like the cat lady comments, they want him to stay away from controversial comments. Yes, throw a counterpunch, get into the mix, but they do not want him to reiterate some of those controversies that have been front and center that they feel take away from top issues like the economy, like immigration.
All right, for more on what to expect from the Harris-Walz campaign, let's bring in Arizona Senator Mark Kelly. He's appearing with us tonight as a campaign surrogate. Senator, thank you so much for being with us. Where you hear some of the talk about the expectation game. What is the expectation tonight?
Well, I think it's about contrast. You know, in the case of Governor Walz and Kamala Harris, you've got two people that want to lead this country into the future, that have a vision, that want to bring down costs for health care and prescription drugs and child care and so many other things that affect American families. And on the other hand, you have Donald Trump and his Project 2025 that's going to increase costs, $4,000 out-of-pocket costs for American families. And if you're a senior who has benefited from the prescription drug benefit that we put into place with Kamala Harris and the administration, that would go away. So I would expect that we will see the contrast between what each side is offering.
Will Walz go after former President Trump's record or J.D. Vance's record?
Well, I think what you got to understand about J.D. is he's a Yale-trained, mouthpiece for Donald Trump. Donald Trump is, what matters here. He's a convicted felon. Kamala Harris is an experienced prosecutor, an attorney general, senator, and a vice president who really cares about the American people and cares about families. What I've seen from Donald Trump is, he puts people into two categories. You're either the con man or you're the person being conned, and he offers very little for middle-class, working-class families and everyday Americans.
Senator, you're from the great state of Arizona, of course, my home state. If you can tell, I'm biased toward it. Arizona, of course, was decisive.
Tucson.
Yes, Tucson, Arizona. It was decisive 4 years ago, and yet Kamala Harris seems to be losing ground there. Tim Walz has a rather progressive record on immigration. He's in Minnesota, gave undocumented migrants driver's license, made them eligible for free college tuition, as well as state health insurance. How's that going to play in Arizona?
Well, Savannah, Tim Walz, when he was a member of Congress, was ranked the 7th most bipartisan House member. He served with Gabby. They were freshmen together. I've known the governor, well, and during his service. He's got the experience for this job. And Kamala Harris is ready to go here on day one. And, she wants to take this country into the future where Donald Trump just wants to drag us back into the past and offer more tax tax cuts for billionaires, shred our alliances, and take away health care rights from women. That's what people should remember about the first Trump presidency.
But is immigration a vulnerability in Arizona? I guess just to put a fine point on it, are some of these immigration stances a problem in the state of Arizona, which was decisive last time around?
I was at the border with the vice president on Friday, and we met with sheriff and some mayors, county supervisors, the Border Patrol, and Customs and Border Protection, and talked about these issues. You got to remember, Kamala Harris was a prosecutor and attorney general and senator of a border state. She understands the border very well. And what Donald Trump did on the border, I mean, the last thing he did that had a huge impact is he told Republican senators that they could not vote for the bipartisan border security deal that we negotiated with the White House and with Senate Republicans. And what that did is, I mean, what it would have done if we could pass it, and we were about to pass it, was it was going to increase Border Patrol pay. We're going to hire more Border Patrol agents, more infrastructure, more fentanyl detection machines. Donald Trump stopped that. Kamala Harris has said that on day one, if we can send her that legislation, and I think we can after Donald Trump loses this election, if we send her that legislation, she'll sign it into law. She's the one who really cares about solving this problem, and will work to try to solve it. Donald Trump just wants to talk about it, Savannah. And, you know, he often just goes down there to get a picture. I had a very effective visit with her on Friday. It went very well. She's ready to deal with this issue.
Senator Mark Kelly, we've got to leave it there. We've got lots to get to. Thank you for your time.
We'll take a break. Coming up, we're counting down to the first and only vice presidential debate where the two VP candidates will introduce themselves to the country in many ways. We'll have a closer look at who they are and what they bring to the table right after this. Welcome back to our special coverage of the first and only vice presidential debate this election cycle between former President Trump's running mate, Ohio Senator J.D. Vance, and Vice President Harris's running mate, Minnesota Governor Tim Walz.
We're going to show you the debate live once it starts in a few moments. But first, a closer look at the candidates. So let's go back to Peter Alexander, with more on who Tim Walz is and how he could help Vice President Harris. Hi, Peter.
Savannah, good morning, or good evening, right? Is what time of day is it?
Old habits,
It's the first time that Vance and Walz will have debated in 2 years since they ran for their current positions. Neither of them has faced a moment like this, of course, with millions expected to be watching. Walz has spoken publicly about his desire, though, to debate Vance since Kamala Harris first announced him as his running mate. As a plain-spoken Midwesterner, Tim Walz is known for not pulling any punches.
This is not about the Second Amendment. This is about the safety of our children and our communities.
A self-described white dude for Kamala Harris, the Democratic governor is running alongside the nation's first woman of color atop a major party's ticket. Walz grew up in small-town Nebraska, joining the National Guard as a teenager, using the GI Bill to pay tuition. He'd serve in the Guard for more than 2 decades, becoming a school teacher and high school football coach. He volunteered for John Kerry's presidential campaign in 2004. In 2006, launching his own long-shot bid for Congress, in an upset ousting a 6-term Republican incumbent. Walz served in Washington for the next 12 years, establishing himself as a moderate Democrat. Then in 2018, he ran for governor, winning in a landslide, though some of his progressive policies would draw Republican criticism that he's tried to dismiss.
What a monster. Kids are eating and having full bellies so they can go learn.
2020 would bring defining moments. The COVID pandemic and the killing of George Floyd that triggered riots and sharp attacks from Republicans for why it took Walz 3 days to call up the National Guard.
Is what it is, and I simply believe that we try to do the best we can.
Walz's critics also point to a state audit report that found major failures by Minnesota's education department during the pandemic, allowing rampant misuse of a federal program meant to feed children.
We can always do better. I think, again, context matters. It was a challenging time for everybody.
Selected by Harris in part for his chemistry with her and his working-class roots, Walz regularly touts his connections to the labor community.
I had an opponent who thought this was a real zinger when we were going at it. He said, Governor Walz is in the pocket of organized labor. And I said, that is a damn lie. I am the pocket.
Walz has grown into his role as an attack dog, not shy about going after former President Trump
or his running mate, Senator J.D. Vance.
You guys are just weird. And it's, you know, they're running for He-Man Women Haters Club or something.
At this summer's Democratic convention, Walz' 17-year-old son Gus, sitting alongside his mother Gwen and sister Hope, went viral for this emotional moment, reacting to his father's acceptance speech.
But it was just such a visceral, emotional moment that I'm grateful I got to experience it, and I'm so proud of him.
But for his part, Walz has had to defend some of his public comments.
Those weapons of war that I carried in war is the only place where those weapons are at.
Facing accusations, he inflated his military record and retired from the Army National Guard to avoid service in Iraq. Walz says he's proud of his service. Now, the 60-year-old governor from the middle of America is set to make the case why he and Harris should serve in the White House for the next 4 years.
In my reporting ahead of tonight, I'll tell you one of the most interesting things that I learned from those people close to Tim Walz. They say one of their concerns privately is that he can have a tendency to be a bit heated and defensive tonight. So, Savannah and Lester, it's going to be interesting to watch this conversation between the two men. No audience in the room. They've been preparing Walz in case Vance tries to get under his skin. How does he handle it this evening on that stage?
We'll be watching for it. Peter, thank you. Let's bring back Garrett Hake now for more on who J.D. Vance is and what he brings to the Trump campaign. Garrett?
Lester, J.D. Vance has already introduced himself to the country once as the author of a best-selling memoir, but now this self-described hillbilly has to reintroduce himself to the country again as someone who can make the case that he's ready to be a heartbeat away from the presidency. He is the junior senator from Ohio with only 2 years in government. But J.D. Vance is one of former President Trump's biggest defenders.
I want to help Donald Trump get elected because it's really important that he become the next president.
In the Senate,
how can we defend Ukraine's borders when we're not even defending our own American border?
And on the campaign trail,
The question is, are we going to send America First fighters to Washington, D.C.?
he's one of the leading voices of Trump's MAGA America First movement, not holding back in pushing the former president's agenda.
Republicans, we need to govern like we won the majority the American people gave us, not like a bunch of cowards. Let's get to work in Washington, D.C. No more talk. It's time for action.
But that hasn't always been the case. This was Vance in 2016.
I'm a never Trump guy. I never liked him.
He was deeply critical of Trump then, going so far as to liken him to America's Hitler. But this was Vance just 6 years later.
The president is right. I wasn't always nice, but the simple fact is he's the best president of my lifetime, and he revealed the corruption in this country like nobody else.
Running for Senate in 2022 in Ohio as a pro-Trump candidate.
I was wrong about Donald Trump. I didn't think he was going to be a good president, Brett. He was a great president.
Vance shot to fame as the author of Hillbilly Elegy, a memoir about his upbringing in a poor, hard-hit part of Ohio. He then enlisted in the Marines, attended Yale Law School, worked in venture capital, and then on to the Senate, his first role in government. On the major issues, Vance has said in the past he would support a national ban on abortion after 15 weeks, but supports exceptions, including for rape and the life of the mother. On immigration, Vance has called for finishing Trump's southern border wall. He has come under criticism for a 2021 interview with Tucker Carlson, where he said the U.S. is being run by
a bunch of childless cat ladies who are miserable at their own lives and the choices that they've made, and so they want to make the rest of the country miserable too.
And on the issue of the 2020 presidential election, then Senate candidate Vance suggested he would have supported fraudulent slates of pro-Trump electors.
If I had been vice president, I would have told the states like Pennsylvania, Georgia, and so many others that we needed to have multiple slates of electors, and I think the U.S. Congress should have fought over it from there.
In recent weeks, Vance's false claims about Haitian immigrants eating pets in Springfield, Ohio, set off a firestorm, which he later suggested was by design.
If I have to, create stories so that the American media actually pays attention to the suffering of the American people, then that's what I'm going to do.
Now, the father of two, just 40 years old, after not even a full 2 years in government, is set to step onto the debate stage to make the case why he and Donald Trump should be the next leaders of the United States. One other important thing to know about J.D. Vance is the close friendship he's developed with Donald Trump Jr., who was instrumental in Vance getting picked for this ticket. The two of them see themselves as shaping the future of a Republican Party even after Donald Trump Sr. is off the stage. Guys.
All right. Thank you very much, Garrett. We want to turn now to President Biden's former White House press secretary, Jen Psaki, and Donald Trump's former deputy White House secretary, Hogan Gidley. Good afternoon. Good evening to all of you. It's this close to a good morning. Peter started it. Hogan, let's talk about, we're talking about J.D. Vance. Yeah. Some of these likability issues. Is this something you think he should take on tonight, whether it's the childless cat lady or some of these other kinds of comments?
I think it'll solve itself just naturally. I think it gives him a chance to introduce himself to the American people. You heard one of Trump's surrogates earlier talk about his tough upbringing, where he had a mom who was an addict. She wasn't around. He was raised by his grandmother, obviously going into the military, putting himself, getting to college, rather, with scholarship money, that type of thing. Kind of shows you his ability to relate to people out there who are facing struggles in their daily lives. What's interesting, though, is in this particular debate, J.D. Vance has an opportunity here to really kind of expose, I think, Governor Walz, because he hasn't really answered any questions. He had one debate where he was like an emotional support animal for Kamala, and he had one question about his lying about his military service, and he said, I don't really speak English well, so that's part of the problem. But he was a governor. And so he has a record. He's going to have to answer why he wants taxpayer dollars to pay for illegal aliens to get free health care and free college tuition, why he locked down his state and then had National Guard troops fire paintballs at citizens on their front porch. Those are serious issues he's never had to answer for. I think JD's going to bring that up.
Because as Jason Miller, the Trump campaign staffer, said, there's an article that says they bubble wrapped Tim Walz. And look, I mean, Axios, an independent news organization, did an analysis and found that Vance alone has done more than 7 times as many interviews as Harris and Walz.
Sure, and also when Vance does this, he often attacks the press. But putting that aside, Tim Walz,
he's there.
No, I agree with you. Tim Walz propelled himself onto this ticket because he was so appealing on television and because he was so relatable and likable. He should be out there more. And I think it's crazy that he's not out there more. And it is true that it also means that it puts more pressure on this night. He's going to have to answer tough questions. So will J.D. Vance.
Sure.
I do think immigration, you were talking about this earlier with the senator from Arizona, is a hard one for the Harris-Walz team, because it is the issue where they are most underwater with voters. That's why Harris went to the border, and there is some work to be done on that.
Let me ask both of you, nothing seems to move this race. We're still looking at roughly 50-50. So might the goal for both tonight to be do no harm at this point?
I think the first rule of a vice presidential pick is to do no harm, and that's not just for the pick itself, but in a debate, for example. As we were talking about, though, I think a lot of these camps are already entrenched. A lot of folks are going to vote for Trump no matter what. A lot of folks are going to vote for Kamala no matter what. I think there could be an outside force that really tips the scales here. We just had a hurricane. People are suffering in a state like North Carolina and Georgia, both swing states. A lot of people are suffering, don't get me wrong, but those states matter in this upcoming election. There's now a war, full scale, between Israel and Iran. That's an issue I think the American people care about. And a strike that's going to impact a lot of American people, too.
They don't move the voters on their own. It's how does the ticket deal with those issues. So I think if you're Walz tonight, you have all these backdrop of these challenging issues you just mentioned. It's reminding people about leadership and why stability and sanity in the Situation Room and in the Oval Office actually matters.
And that does.
Remember, Trump's national security team, many of them don't even want him to be the commander-in-chief.
And
so that's a challenge for, I think,
Of course it is. But as president, we didn't have wars breaking out all over the world. We didn't have illegal immigrants coming into our American communities, raping and killing people. And those types of things absolutely should be a reminder to the American people that leadership does matter. And we didn't have these problems when Donald Trump was in the White House.
You can take this debate to NBC News now and continue to the green room. Real quick, show of hands, who thinks there will be another debate between Trump and Harris? Wow.
No.
Who thinks there should be? We'll leave it on this point of agreement.
How about that?
Hogan, Jen, thank you very much. We're going to take a break right here, and still ahead tonight, how the vice presidential debate could shake up the polls with Election Day just 35 days away. Our man Steve Kornacki over at the big board to break it all down. Coming up next. Welcome back back to our special coverage of the first and only vice presidential debate before Election Day.
Tonight's debate is potentially the last debate voters will see before the general election. It could change voters' minds in the key battleground states.
So we've got Steve Kornacki over at his post to break down where the race stands right now. Hi, Steve.
Hi, Savannah and Lester. Take a look here. The national poll average first. All the major national polls, we keep a running average. And right now, Kamala Harris at 49%, Trump at 46%, a 3-point lead in the poll average nationally for Kamala Harris right now. Raises the question, this is the third straight election that Donald Trump has been the Republican nominee. How did the race look at this exact same point the last two times? Well, take a look here. 4 years ago, on this date, in the poll average, Joe Biden had a large lead, 9 points over Donald Trump. And, of course, Biden did go on to unseat Donald Trump. But 8 years ago, at this same point, Hillary Clinton had a lead of, does that 3 look familiar? The exact same 3-point lead that Kamala Harris has in the poll average now. And, of course, Hillary Clinton did win the popular vote in 2016, but she lost to Trump where it matters in the Electoral College, in those key swing states. So what do the swing states look like right now? We've been talking about this core group of 7 battlegrounds. And, again, what you're seeing here is our current average of all the polls in those states. And the headline here, obviously, is extremely close. Look, the widest margin you're going to see here is 3 points for Harris in Michigan and in Nevada. Look at North Carolina. You see Harris there leading. I say leading. It's 1/10 of 1 point in the average right now. One thing to keep in mind, we saw big polling misses in the Midwest states in 2016 and 2020. Both elections, they underestimated. The polls did Trump's actual support. Keep that in mind. Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, as we see numbers there this fall. Has that problem been solved? Does it persist? And just for the sake of showing you the state of play right now, this is not a prediction, but if it were to break exactly like this on Election Day, these states were to go exactly as they look right now, let me show you what it would do to the electoral map. So you see we have the battlegrounds in gray. If we fill them in based on the current polling average, this is what you would get. That would give Harris 292. That would be enough for the presidency. But remember, we just showed you, North Carolina, 1/10 of 1 point. Just by getting that, if Trump could get that, he'd be at 262. He'd be one Midwest state away from the presidency. So that's how close it is when you start to look at those battleground averages right now. Now, in terms of tonight, possible implications for the vote in November in this vice presidential debate, let's take a look at the image of each one of these candidates coming to the stage tonight. Favorable, unfavorable. This is our most recent poll. Tim Walz, 40% positive, 33 negative. He is 7 points above water. J.D. Vance, on the other hand, 32 favorable, 45 unfavorable, 13 points underwater. And perspective on that, if you went back 10 presidential elections, takes us all the way back to 1988, only one major party vice presidential nominee has been further underwater than J.D. Vance is right now. That was Dan Quayle in 1992 when he was running for re-election with Bush Sr. And, of course, that ticket did go on to lose.
All right, Steve, thank you so much.
Kate Snow is talking to a group of voters in the city of Pittsburgh in the critical Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Kate?
Yeah, it is critical, isn't it? Thank you, Lester. I've got 6 voters here with me. All of you described yourselves as somewhat moderate, somewhat in the center, some more than others. I want to start with Rona and Merrill. We've had a lot of news today about Israel and about the attack by Iran. Both of you said you are motivated. You're Jewish, you're Democrats, both of you registered Democrats, but you're seeing this very differently. Rona, tell me why you're thinking about possibly voting for Donald Trump.
Well, today is not a good day to ask me that, I guess, because today, I mean, I'm really thankful, right? Largest barrage of ballistic missiles ever shot at a country in history, and the U.S. supported Israel and shot down missiles along with Jordan and Israel, and so I'm so incredibly thankful for that, and a big Biden fan today.
Are you still thinking you might vote Republican?
I am still undecided, yes, absolutely, because I think every day right now is so utterly critical, and watching how this continues to unfold.
And what about you, Merrill?
And for me, today just verified what I've already felt, that the Biden-Harris administration has been very pro-Israel. Today was really an existential threat for the state of Israel once again. And the United States and the Biden administration, along with Vice President Harris, really stepped up.
So and you're definitely voting Harris going into tonight's debate.
Yes.
Let me turn to Claire and Brian. Both of you voted for Trump in 2016, then went away from Trump in 2020, and now you're both considering former President Trump again, even though I think you said you don't really like J.D. Vance very much.
I really don't like either of them very much. You know, I'm looking at something different. I want something different. I'm not really sure where we're going to end up.
So maybe tonight you hear something that pushes you?
Maybe if tonight I hear something, you know, it might make up my mind. You know, I'm still kind of up in the air, but.
Claire, you said to me that you're a little worried if you vote for Trump, you wouldn't be able to, you'd have to lie to your friends.
I mean, I think it's hard to vote for anyone. You know, the keyboard killers, no matter which way. I mean, you vote, you know, in this town democratically, and someone's like, well, you voted for this mayor, and then you see something federally, and they say, well, you voted for that president, no matter which side you're on.
Brandon, you said that your community, which I think is a predominantly black community, is more divided right now, more at odds than you've seen it in an election.
Yeah, so it just seems like there is no real middle ground. Everything is radicalized. Everything is extreme, kind of like what she was saying. Yeah. But more so from my community, being young and African American, it seems like a lot of people are coming to the topic of politics late, and they're missing nuance. So what they're hearing right now is stirring a lot of passion that's bringing them one way or another.
And John, real quick, one word. What do you need to hear tonight?
I guess it's just seeing that Waltz is going to support Kamala Harris. I'm pretty much decided that
on Harris.
J.D. Vance and Trump are a danger to our democracy.
Thank you all so much. I'll send it back to you guys, Lester.
All right, Kate, thanks very much. We'll take a break next. We're just minutes away from tonight's vice presidential debate. We'll show it to you live after this. Welcome back to our special coverage of tonight's vice presidential debate.
We're about 7 minutes away now. Ohio Senator J.D. Vance facing off against Minnesota Governor Tim Walz. Might be the last debate voters see at all before Election Day.
Let's go back to Tom Yamas in the spin room. It's going to be crowded there tonight, if not already.
Oh, yeah, you guys, you know that is true. You know, these spin rooms are where the candidates come with their surrogates right after the debate to argue they won the debate. I want to show you a live camera right now of this spin room because it's unlike any we've seen before because of its size. It's only about 3,000 to 4,000 square feet. It's going to be filled with reporters and surrogates. There's going to be a crush of people here after the debate, including at least one of the candidates who is debating tonight. So this could be chaotic. It could be exciting. It could be fun. It could be wild. We'll have no idea until after the debate. I will tell you this much. It reminds me of my younger days when you go to house parties here in Manhattan inside studio apartments, and there was way more people than there was room. Nonetheless, it'll be memorable, and we're going to look for all that excitement right after the debate.
Well, we've learned a lot about you, Tom.
I want to hear the rest of the story.
I have to say, I don't know if he was describing a spin room or a ring.
Surely there was more to that story.
All right, let's go to senior White House correspondent Kelly O'Donnell. We're going to get to the bottom of that one. Also in the spoon room, been talking to Tim Walz's staff. So, Kelly, what's the vibe?
Well, I've just heard from those with Governor Walz. They say Vice President Harris put in a phone call to him to wish him good luck. You'd heard about some nerves before all of this. Now they're saying he's energized and he's ready. Among the top goals for Governor Walz today is to be able to talk about Kamala Harris and what she could bring to the country and to try to tie J.D. Vance to the Project 2025 agenda that former President Trump tries to distance himself from as much as possible. They also, in their prep, expect that Vance will try to get under the skin of Governor Walz, and he's going to try to focus on reaching voters who have not yet made up their minds. And they also expect that Governor Walz will have to answer for some of the things that have been a frequent target of J.D. Vance, like questions about his military record, and a time when Governor Walz said that he had been in combat when he was in a foreign country working on behalf of the Afghanistan operation, but not in Afghanistan. So they expect that he'll have to answer for that, and what they have prepared is in some ways to talk about his 24 years in the National Guard and saying that is longer than anything that J.D. Vance has done in his professional life, and that they think that is not an argument that Vance can win. So tone-wise, you're going to see Governor Walz trying to be that affable coach, teacher, dad, and to try to relate to those in the middle of the country who also enjoy plaid, as I know you have noted, Savannah.
All right, Kelly, thank you.
Let's bring back Garrett Hake in the spin room. He's covering the Trump-Vance campaign. What are your thoughts here as we head down to the final minutes?
At the end of the day, Lester, this is still all about the people at the top of the ticket. That's something that wasn't lost today in Trump world. Donald Trump did something unusual today. He held not one but two campaign events of his own on the day of his VP debate, both of them in Wisconsin, mentioning J.D. Vance just one time during those two events in response to a question. So for Donald Trump, this is still about Trump versus Harris, and I think that'll be something that's forefront on the mind of J.D. Vance when he takes the stage tonight as well.
All
Lester?
right. Thank you, Garrett. Let's bring back Kristen Welker, Hallie Jackson, and Peter Alexander has joined the conversation. Peter, I mean, based on everything we've talked about in the last hour, it seems like, in a way, Tim Walz, the work for him is on substance. What does he stand for? Defending past positions as governor of Minnesota. And for J.D. Vance, it's about style. It's about likability, about some of the controversial things he said. That seems like where the work is.
Yeah, I think you guys are right. We've made a lot of these points to this point. One other point that I would just add to this conversation is, remember how this whole campaign started, where age was the big issue? Joe Biden was going to be 86 at the end of a second term. Right now, Donald Trump is 78 years old. His age means there's a little bit unique attention being focused on J.D. Vance right now. He's 40. You're going to see Tim Walz, who is 60 years old today. The last time there was a big age discrepancy like this, 1988, Lloyd Benson and Dan Quayle, who was 41, a year older, of course, then J.D. Vance is when he's up there on stage.
And Vance has been senator for 2 years.
And the gist is, that was one of the rare moments where a line broke through. You know, I knew John F. Kennedy, you're no John F. Kennedy. These moments rarely break through. Is there a viral moment like that that sort of defines this night, or is it a wash ultimately with the last month to go?
Kristen, at the end of the day, and I asked this question with 3 minutes to go, do these debates matter? Does a vice presidential debate matter in the big picture?
They can matter. Think about back in 2012 when Joe Biden had a very strong debate performance against Paul Ryan and really helped to reset the campaign after former President Obama stumbled in his first debate against Mitt Romney. So, yes, they can matter. Again, I think this takes on outsized meaning because of the fact that there's no second presidential debate. One more point. In listening to those voters that Kate was talking to, all of them seem so frustrated with the process. And you think about that word change. Right now, Vice President Kamala Harris wins on the change argument by 9 points. I think that's part of the work that J.D. Vance is going to try to do.
Well, change is interesting because she's an incumbent, but so is former President Trump.
That's right.
So it's interesting to see that. I mean, people say, they like to say, conventional wisdom, these vice presidential debates don't matter. And maybe they didn't when elections weren't decided by 10,000 voters in a Midwest state.
In two different states, and that's it.
Yes.
I come back to something that you have said from the jump, Savannah, through this election cycle, which is, let's have a little bit of humility here, right? It's hard for us to predict, especially with the race this close, especially with the dynamic of no next debate for the presidential candidates. Remember what this race is going to come down to. Those 6 critical battlegrounds, the economy and immigration. We have seen that consistently in the polling. Expect to hear both of those issues hammered big time on stage tonight.
And worth noting also, this is the first presidential election since Roe was overturned. I think that's going to be an X factor, too.
Mics will be on tonight. Is that going to make a huge difference in terms of expectations based on what we saw in the presidential debate?
Remember, it was the Harris campaign that in the presidential debate wanted the mics to be on throughout here. This time, they are on throughout. CBS can turn them off as necessary, but it's that back and forth. They're hoping that you can hear those snide comments, perhaps, by either side.
Show of hands. Who thinks there will be another debate between Trump and Harris?
Listen to you at this show of hands.
Show of hands. It's a quick poll. Okay. Who thinks there should be?
We're journalists. We think there should be.
Okay. All right. There we go.
Good answer. Well, it is the top of the hour now, 9 p.m. here in New York City. We are just seconds away from tonight's only vice presidential debate between Ohio Republican Senator J.D. Vance and Minnesota Democratic Governor Tim Walz.
That's right. It is also potentially, if you haven't noticed, possibly the last debate we will see before Election Day. Election Day now just 35 days away, 5 weeks.
We have kind of set the table here on what people will be looking at and what we'll all be talking about in a little while. We will have in-depth analysis once the debate concludes here on NBC. But tonight's event is hosted by CBS News in their studio in New York, just a few blocks from here.
Yeah, and as the last debate was between the running mates, Donald Trump and Kamala Harris, there's no audience in there tonight. So each candidate is going to have 2 minutes for their answers, and then there's a rebuttal. And the moderators have said, Lester, there will be some fact-checking, but they're really counting on the candidates to fact-check each other.
And as we noted, unlike the last debate, microphones will not be muted, but the network says they reserve the right to mute the candidates. So that'll be an interesting process as they go along.
Okay, the vice presidential debate about to be on. Let's go to CBS Network Studios, West 57th, here in the heart of Manhattan, and watch this debate.
Presidential debate.